Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to all of you. Today we are going to have our 10th session on public administration, and today's topic will be government and administrative reforms. Well, before going into detailed discussion of this topic, let me tell you that civil service and administrative reforms has been a mantra which has consistently been adopted by almost each of the political government or even a military dictator. The philosophy which looks very appealing to the masses is that the ruling elite of this country, the ruling junta of this country, have ultimately realized this fact that the general masses believe that their problems are not being addressed by the civil administration, because they have got their direct interaction with the masses, and masses think around that the problems they are facing is because of the lack of delivery, the inefficiency on part of civil administration perhaps. So each of the leading junta, the leading elite of this country, the political elite or even the military dictatorship in this country, have utilized this sense very cleverly. And each of them has come up with this slogan that we are going to go for institutional reforms of the civil bureaucracy in Pakistan. And almost all of the governments, as I mentioned already, whether it was civil or the otherwise, civil administration and civil services has actually proved to be a laboratory for their experiments. Without realizing this fact that civil administration actually implements the policies pre-formulated by the executives of this country. And if there are some basic flaws in those policies, if the laws, rules, regulations made by the legislature and the executive bosses are having some basic flaws in their, the fruition you expect out of them is not basically available there, then just this mantra of coming up with this slogan of reforming the civil administration without realizing the ground realities of all other areas would not be able to serve the purpose. It's true that the civil administration is not perfect on its part. It has deteriorated over the period of time. We must acknowledge that there must be some serious problems in implementation of these policies as well. But one must be very judicious in his approach when we are going to decide on this matter, that if the masses are not getting the true fruition of the policies of the civil governments or otherwise, then whether the whole of the responsibility of this failure shall go to the civil administration itself or on the authorities who actually formulate the policies. So, the discussion of our today's topic is the first one is the government and administrative reforms, and the second part is organization of provincial and local governments. As far as the second part is concerned, we have discussed this issue in detail when we have discussed the organization in public administration. But we will be able to touch some part of it wherever it has been missed already. But let's start our first part first. What's the meaning of a reform? And why we need reform? We must be having this understanding of the fact that the human behavior, outlook of the people, attitude of the people, and many other parameters related to any of the human being or any of the item that change regularly. Changing the human behavior, changing the outlook of a person or a thing, attitude of a person, or many of the other parameters is quite natural. That happens. And why that happens? Because the environment in which we are living, we are performing, we are working, that continues to change. The persons we are interacting with are having different attitudes and different outlook, so we transform ourselves accordingly. Circumstances around us change, we change ourselves. So to be stagnant on something is quite unnatural. कहा यह जाता है कि only change is permanent in nature. सिर्फ चेंज ही ऐसी चीज है जो परमानेंट है. Stagnant policies without realizing the ground realities of a particular area, even if those policies are extraordinarily good, but if they are not acclimatized with that particular environment in which they are being utilized, implemented, that will not be serving the purpose. When we talk about reform, reform means make changes, especially on institutional basis, or some practice to improve something. The purpose of reformation shall be the improvement in some particular area, the improvement in dispensation of services to the masses. The prime objective of the civil administration is that they should work as a bridge between the ruler and the ruled, and a country which claims to be a modern welfare democratic state. Its prime objective remains that the masses across should be in good shape. The vision of that leadership is to bring an overall socio-economic development in the country. Good enough? To realize that dream, you need to reform, you need to bring institutional reforms wherever they are necessary. But the basis of those reforms should be sound enough, should be based on some strong ideology. And when we talk about the public administration and delivery to the people, then the ideology of your reformative agenda should be the good of the people. To minimize the gap, all types of gap, you should minimize the social stratification in society, the vertical social stratification of the society. when we talk about the goodwill of the masses, when we talk about the welfare of the masses, then the ideology of your reformative agenda should be based on this one basic thing. You must be thinking around on reforms, on administrative reforms, but the leading principle, but the guiding principle shall remain to minimize that gap between the different classes in the society, to ensure rule of law in the country, equality of rights in the country. When we talk about the basic principles of a modern democratic welfare state, then the dream of that modern welfare state, though you think around, that shall be realized ultimately by implementation of the policies formulated by you, by the civil administration. But then we need to be rationalized while incorporating such type of things. Let's try to understand what are the reasons for any reformative agenda. When we talk about the reforms in administration, what reasons can enforce anybody to come up for reforms? The first thing, the gap between existing system and the want of the people. अगर आपको ये लगता है कि आपकी जो इस वक्त अवेलेबल एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव स्ट्रक्चर है, सिस्टम है, that is not delivering, and there's a huge gap between what is happening around at the moment and what people expect of the government and administration, then it is the high time to go for reforms. Second, we all know that civil administration in Pakistan was the legacy of the Indian civil service, which actually was the continuity of the British bureaucracy in Pakistan and India. So that colonial mindset, the transformation of a white bureaucracy into a black bureaucracy, perhaps that colonial mindset has not transformed over the period of time. The bureaucratic legacy with Britishers left in India was not meant for a modern welfare state. The prime objective they had was to maintain a better law and order situation and stability in the country. The rights of the people, the goodwill of the people, the welfare of the masses was not their prime concern. So you had to ultimately transform yourself from that colonial mindset to the mindset of an administrator of a modern welfare state. Number 3, you have to incorporate the ecological factors in your administration. With the change of circumstances, with the change of ecology in which you are working, it is always the requirement of the hour that you should be incorporating the modern ecological factors in your administrative techniques. If you are going to follow that old dated system things, procedures, and you are not incorporating the modern day ecological changes happening around you, then of course it's the high time to go for reforms. We have been following the Weber's theory of bureaucracy, but we all know that Weber's theory of bureaucracy had got its own limitations, had got its own restrictions and limitations on part of Pakistan and India. We remained unable to implement even the Weberian bureaucracy theory 100%. But still, as discussed in detail in that particular chapter of Bureaucracy and Civil Service of Pakistan, we had discussed this concept in detail, that perhaps the system of which Weber talks about, which we remained unable to implement 100%, may not be absolutely suitable for the current environment in which we are living. We need to realize the changes happening around us, and we should look forward towards some new model of management, maybe the concept of new public management. Then, this concept of globalization has affected each and every sector of life. How the public administration can be an exception. The world has transformed into a global village. This globalization concept has actually brought each and every technique all across the globe to almost each and every part of the world. Realizing the need and requirement of those practices being done at the various parts of the world may be considered in our own country, provided that we have due feasibility study, we have prior and proper consideration of the ground realities, so that we can move forward. Then, advancement of democracy. In some areas, the continuity of the democracy, the advancement of the democracy has made the people more alert, more vigilant. They have started realizing their own rights, perhaps in a more effective manner as ever before. Right? So these are some of the reasons that why the reforms are necessary. Let's try to cover some forms of reform. कि आपकी जो रिफॉर्म्स हैं वो किस एरिया में पॉसिबल हैं, कौन कौन से एरियाज हैं जो इफेक्ट होंगे आपकी रिफॉर्म से. The problems we are facing are multidimensional. Then how we can expect that only a reformative agenda in some particular area will be serving the ultimate purpose? When the problem is multi-pronged, multidimensional, then we need to bring reforms in multi-dimensions. We can't ignore all of the important areas. We need to bring reforms in administration. Sure, we shall, we should. But at the same time, we can't ignore the social side. We can't ignore the economical side. And we can't ignore even the judicial side. Why I am saying that? Because I am only talking about the administrative reforms. Then why I am talking about the social, economical and judicial reforms? Let's try to understand this concept. Your administrative reforms are directly or indirectly connected with the social, economical and judicial reforms in your country. A public administrator, a civil administrator, while performing his duties, is in direct interaction, in direct connection of all of these sectors. I give you an example. We think around that we have got some serious problem of a huge social ill in the shape of corruption in Pakistan. Now this problem has got multi-dimensional issues, multi-pronged issues. And if we are going to serve this problem on one single aspect, maybe administration, then you can't find the results. You have to proceed against this social problem on all possible fronts, including social, economical, and judicial. Each of the act a public administrator comes up with affects the social fabric of someone. Maybe because of the economical problem of someone, may be affected by some judicial action by an honorable court. So, the civil administration job is directly related to all of these areas. So, there are some quite understandable reasons for this reformative agenda. We should be reforming ourselves in almost each and every sector, socio-economical, administrative and judicial parts. But when we are trying to implement the reforms, जब हम implementation की बात करते हैं, first thing is that you come up with the right reformative agenda. We are going to discuss in the lateral part that what are those basic principles you need to keep in mind when you are going for any of the administrative reforms agenda. But once you have come up with that reforms proposals, it's very important that how its implementation goes. As I said, although change is the only permanent thing in nature, but still this remains a fact that change is always resisted. When there will be some reformative agenda, there will be some resistance to it. And to check that resistance, you must have planned before. You need to come up with some strategy where you can minimize the impact of that resistance. Number two, for this particular purpose, the implementation of your reforms, you need to show resilience on part of the government, resilience on part of the executive, the political resolution on part of political class. Without that political resolution and will and resilience on part of your leadership, that reformative agenda, even if it is framed awfully well, will not be having its proper results. Right? The third thing, while implementing the reformative agendas, we need to keep in mind, and we should not be considering only the administrative side of that. We should be keeping in mind the legal side of that. You come up with some reformative agenda, and that is detrimental to some of the basic provisions of the Constitution. The people have got the space to go against such type of reforms in the different courts of law. So we should be having proper consideration of all of those factors around, and then you have to show the resilience on your part so that your reformative agenda is applicable. Then there are some public pressure groups who are not willing that reformative agenda should be implemented. You have to cater for that pressure as well. That media and pressure of civil society has to be ultimately neutralized by the will of the government, the resolution on part of your leadership, the resilience shown on part of your leadership. But this can only happen that once your reformative agenda is rationalized, once your reformative agenda should not be based on some particular class, it should not be having any bias whatsoever. Your reforms should be absolutely based on study of the ground realities of a particular situation, and then utilizing the best possible human resource to ensure reforms across the board, not affecting a particular class and particular section of society. Only then you can handle such type of problems in implementation. Whenever you are going to go for reforms, you need to include some of the very important areas in reforms. Inclusion of some of very important areas. Consideration of these areas. The first thing, population growth and control in the shape of family planning, public hygiene. Whenever you are going for a reformative agenda, you need to keep in mind whether you have considered the population growth, whether you have got some system of knowing that after how much time what population growth will be there, and these type of reforms will be affecting whether it will be able to work, that increase in population ultimately. Number two, you should be keeping in mind the fruits of that reforms in the shape of drug control, many of the other social ills. Your target should be the public service providers. The public should be provided with the best of the services. Your academic institutions are not the exceptions, although they have got their autonomy. But these are the centers of, the future of a country. So you can't ignore them. Your foreign affairs, your electoral reforms, all of these are the important areas which you should keep in mind. Now we come towards the limitations, the problems of administrative reforms, the limitations. देखिए जी, होता ऐसा है कि जब आप रिफॉर्म्स करना चाह रहे होते हैं तो बेसिकली एक गैप होता है बिटवीन द ओल्ड प्रैक्टिसेस एंड द न्यू प्रैक्टिसेस यू वांट टू कम अप विद. ओल्ड प्रैक्टिसेस से आपने एनालिसिस किया होता है कि रिस्पॉन्स नहीं मिल रहा डिजायर्ड. न्यू प्रैक्टिसेस डेस्टिन कर रही होती हैं उसको. अब अगर तो आपका रिफॉर्मेटिव एजेंडा अनबायस्ड है, किसी स्पेशल सेक्शन ऑफ सोसाइटी को कंसिडर किए बगैर, और जो आपने रिफॉर्मेटिव एजेंडा बनाया है दैट इज परफेक्टली after the feasibility study of your own ground realities of a particular area, your own social structure, whatever you are maintaining, अगर इन तमाम फैक्टर्स को देखकर आपका एक सिलसिला बना है तो then you will be having lesser resistance. लेकिन अगर आपने अदरवाइज किया है तो you will be facing more resistance. Keep in mind that whenever you are going for reforms, it's not a day-to-day agenda, it's not a day-to-day affair. You need to work in detail. Once you are going to reform, it should retain for some period of time. Only the practice on those reforms will further mature it. So it's not a day-to-day affair. You have to work in detail. It's a long-term process. Should be treated accordingly. Then you need to ensure the support of the client. आप जहां reforms लाना चाहते हैं, without the support of that client, you can't come up with reforms. Till the time आप interact नहीं करते हैं अपने client के साथ जो उस particular previous environment में काम कर रहा है, या जो लोग effectees हैं, जो उस particular area के effectees हैं as a client, जब तक आप उनकी सपोर्ट हासिल नहीं कर सकते हैं तो हाउ यू कैन कम अप विद with qualitative reforms addressing the problems of the people. Then the impact of your reforms should be across the board. As I mentioned, no biases. And the implementation problem जो है आपका वो उस वक्त ज़्यादा आता है कि when you come up with a new thought, you need more infrastructure, at least new infrastructure perhaps, new HR in a sense, new capacitated HR, new trained HR. You have to make tutorials and SOPs. You have to show will on part of department, show will on part of society, show will on part of even the beneficiary of the old systems. Why there is resistance to the reforms? Resistance to reforms is there just because of this fact that there are old beneficiaries of the old systems and they don't want actually कि किसी भी तरह से reformative agenda successful रहे. Precondition for success कि अगर आप reforms में कामयाब होना चाहते हैं वो कौन से preconditions हैं जिनका आपको ख्याल रखना होगा. देखिए जी, the authority which wants to bring reforms should be serious and sincere. The authority which wants to bring reforms should be serious and sincere, dedicated, should not be succumbing to any pressure whatsoever then. If the authority thinks that the previous system is outdated, the previous system is not delivering to the masses, to the people, to that section of society for which that system has been made, once he is convinced, then he has to show sincerity and seriousness on his part. The first condition. The second thing, it must be sure on part of the authority that these reforms will bring desired results, and that can only be possible if your reforms are based on proper homework, if your reforms are based on merit, if your reforms are above all kinds of biases. Only then you can have this belief that these reforms are going to deliver ultimately. Once you are going for reforms, you shall gauge the attitude and the mentality of the people about these proposals. You have to gauge their mentality, you have to gauge their attitude so that you can prepare the response against that resistance. But once you are convinced, then you have to be resilient in implementation of those reforms. If you are going to take step back after the first pressure is exerted on part of the beneficiaries of the old system, then the reforms will remain a dream ultimately. Failure of the present system and assurance on part of the reformer that system has got rotten, system will not deliver now, system has got some serious problems itself. जब तक ये यकीन नहीं पाया जाएगा, you cannot go for reforms. I give you the example. I was part of a seminar when we were discussing the Police Order 2002. One of the senior officers of the Police Service of Pakistan was part of that seminar. And we were discussing that why this Police Order 2002 has not been implemented in letter and spirit. then the police officer mentioned that I have asked this question from many of the police officers, that do you really feel some problem with the Police Act, which was before implemented, before the promulgation of Police Order 2002? He smiled and said, I didn't find even a single police officer who mentioned that he was facing some problems with the previous act. I mean, once you are not having this belief and assurance on your part that the system which you are going to reform is rotten, is over, cannot be continued, then you can't reform that system. And even if you reform, you will not be able to implement that, because you have not assured yourself that the previous system ever needed reforms. People's cooperation, both in the within organization, outside organization, within the national boundaries, outside the national boundaries, you have to ensure the cooperation of those. If those factors are going to resist, then your reformative agenda can be in problems. So, these are some of the important aspects regarding the government administrative reforms. The recent move on institutional and administrative reforms in Pakistan has been under a task force जिसकी कमांड इशरत हुसैन साहब कर रहे हैं, and he is working on institutional reforms in Pakistan. Many of the proposals are being discussed. Just like in the past, as civil service has been a laboratory of the various experiments on part of the various governments, we expect and we hope that this time this institutional reformative task force should be able to discuss the problems of administration in Pakistan, keeping all the agendas, keeping all those biases aside. They should be considering that the prime objective of the civil administration is to implement the pre-formulated policies of the government, and they should be in the best of their position to implement those policies in letter and spirit. There must be some changes if they are necessary, but one thing we should keep in mind, that just for playing with the gallery, just for the sake of mentioning this, that we have an agenda of reformation, and that agenda for reformation is not based on proper homework, then this pursuit of having another attempt, this pursuit of institutional reforms will unfortunately be another episode as we have witnessed in the past. So this is what is about the government administrative reforms. The other part was the organization of the provincial and local government. We had discussed this concept in detail in our organizational lecture, in which I told you around that what is the organizational organogram of the provincial governments, how the chief executive of a province, the chief minister with his cabinet and a secretariat system under his control works. As far as the local government systems are concerned, I had discussed in detail that the system of local government in Pakistan has not been in practice during the tenures of the political governments. But yes, whenever there have been a military dictator in Pakistan, they have come up with their own local government systems, telling people that we are the democrats and we will bring the actual democracy in the country. One thing is for sure, that to realize the dream of that modern developed welfare state, you need to devolute the power. You have to come up with an effective local government systems, but unfortunately this particular area has been practiced again and again in Pakistan. पाकिस्तान में ये तजर्बा पहली बार जनरल अयूब के टाइम में किया गया जब बेसिक डेमोक्रेसीज़ का कॉन्सेप्ट लाया गया। अयूब साहब के जाने के बाद बेसिक डेमोक्रेसीज़ का ख्वाब चलता बना। उसके बाद जनरल ज़िया-उल हक साहब तशरीफ़ लाए, वो ज़िला कौंसल का सिस्टम लाए, उनके साथ ज़िला कौंसल का सिस्टम चलता बना। उसके बाद मुशर्रफ साहब आए, ही केम अप विद हिज ओन सिस्टम ऑफ निज़ामत जिसमें डिस्ट्रिक्ट नाजिम, तहसील नाजिम, यूनियन नाजिम का कॉन्सेप्ट आया। मुशर्रफ साहब के जाने के बाद ये निज़ाम भी चलता बना। उसके बाद करंट सिचुएशन आपकी ये है कि वंस दैट लोकल गवर्नमेंट सिस्टम वाज एक्सक्लूडेड फ्रॉम द Schedule 6 of the Constitution, this particular area has become the provincial subject. अब ये provincial subject है और तमाम provinces के पास ये right है कि वो अपने अपने province के अंदर local government के सिलसिले में law making कर सकते हैं। मुशर्रफ साहब के जाने के बाद जब Schedule 6 से ये सिस्टम बाहर आया तो उस वक्त पाकिस्तान के चारों सूबों ने अपनी अपनी लॉ मेकिंग की, जिसमें पंजाब में एक जो सिस्टम लाया गया दैट वाज मच क्लोजर टू द सिस्टम which was promulgated by जनरल ज़िया-उल हक ऑफ ज़िला कौंसल सिस्टम। आल्दो कि उसमें थोड़ी बहुत अमेंडमेंट्स लाई गई जिसमें एजुकेशन अथॉरिटीज़ और हेल्थ अथॉरिटीज़ बनाई गई डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल पर, हेडेड बाय द CEOs। जहाँ तक KPK का ताल्लुक है, वहाँ पे जो निज़ाम इंट्रोड्यूस किया गया वो मुशर्रफ साहब का जो लोकल गवर्नमेंट निज़ाम था उसके बहुत करीब था, उसको फर्दर रिफ़ाइन करने की कोशिश की गई। जबकि सिंध और बलूचिस्तान में प्योर सिस्टम ऑफ लोकल गवर्नमेंट जो जनरल ज़िया-उल हक के ज़माने में ज़िला कौंसल सिस्टम जो था उसको इम्प्लीमेंट किया गया। लेकिन जैसे ही वो लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स बनी और करंट पॉलिटिकल गवर्नमेंट इलेक्शन के बाद आई तो थोड़े ही अरसे बाद उन्होंने लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स तमाम को सस्पेंड कर दिया और लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स की तमाम पावर्स एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर्स को, यानी डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल पे DC को, डिवीजनल लेवल पे कमिश्नर को और तहसील लेवल पे असिस्टेंट कमिश्नर को दे दी गई, जिसके खिलाफ रिसेंटली सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने एक डिसीजन दिया है और उन तमाम लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स को बहाल कर दिया गया है। ताहम सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ऑर्डर किया है कि अगर प्रोविंसेस ने अपनी लॉ मेकिंग दोबारा रिविजिट करनी है लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स के सिलसिले में तो वो उन्हें प्रायोरिटी के ऊपर करके नए इलेक्शंस करवा देनी चाहिए। सो दिस इज़ द स्टोरी ऑफ लोकल गवर्नमेंट सिस्टम इन पाकिस्तान। विद दैट it's all about this topic we had to discuss today. Thank you so much.